Buonasera a tutti e benvenuti a questa masterclass molto particolare. I will switch in English because my guests are two Master of Wine and Rod Smith Master of Wine together with Dimitri Walters Master of Wine will lead this beautiful masterclass, introductory masterclass of the Institute of Master of Wine. So I'm really honored and glad that two examples of really virtuous and the most important people in the wine business, in the wine industry are here in order to deliver what is the Master of Wine Institute, which is the the program in order to become one of the very few people in the world owning this very precious title. So consider that in the world now there are only 419, I suppose, if I'm not okay, Master Wines. So it's quite a hard program. I can say it because I am a Master Wine student, so I am allowed to say it properly. And I think that for Milano Wine Week it's really important to have this kind of people here to represent the industry of wine, because we will discover the program of the Institute of Master of Wine, but also we will taste blind 3 different wines, and we will discover how a Master of Wine approach a glass in order to answer some questions. Of course, the question will be the usual question that are delivered in the Master of Wine exam. So it will be very interesting to understand how a Master of Wine approach the evidence from the glass in order to discover the identity, the quality, the style, and other things that Rod and Dimitri will tell you very soon. So thank you for being here, and I know it will be a delicious masterclass. Thank you.
Thank you. Ti ringrazio, Cristina.
That's quite a build-up.
Grazie.
Yeah, what a build-up. Parlo piccolo italiano, ma non bene. Allora, adesso in inglese, if that's all right. So, yeah, thank you for that introduction. That's fantastic. So we're here to let you know a little bit about the Institute of Masters of Wine and the qualification MW as it becomes more globally recognized. We'll get to some recent people who've passed. So we have now our first Italian resident, and I'm sure some of you know Gabriele Gorelli from Montalcino. He's not actually the first Italian. I remember when everyone said, oh, it's the first Italian MW, Pier Paolo Petrazzi, who's lived in the UK all his life. He said, well, I've got an Italian passport, but it's resident. And I think in Cristina we have a new Italian MW to be in the next few years, I'm sure. And there's a winemaker in Sicily I think is very close as well. So it's very important that wine-producing countries are generating new MWs. As we'll come on to, it started out as a very British thing, but it is changing, and that's important. Would you like to add to that?
I remember having Italian students about 7 or 8 years ago, before it was popular here. And I can tell you the current breed of Italian wine students are very different. They're very focused and objective and have a different world outlook. So I think we have a really good cadre of Italian students. Gabriele has passed, Andrea Lonardi, Pietro Russo, I think is going to pass pretty soon, and Andrea, and you. And others too, coming up in the pipeline. No pressure, obviously.
Okay, so shall we move to this presentation, which I'm sure we can make available to you if you need it. This is often delivered by the executive director of the Institute, and he sends his apologies. He would love to have been here, but he's in London. It's still quite difficult flitting backwards and forwards in aeroplanes, as you know, so we're doing it in his stead. There we go. So, I need to press this to go forward, don't I? So, is it coming up on both screens?
No, just one.
Okay, just that one. I'm not going to stand here and read it out, but as Cristina said, we're now 419 people in the world, in 30 countries. It's got a pass rate of about 10–12%, so that gives you an indication of how many people have sat the exam over the years. And it started in 53, so it's been running for more than 65 years, which means that the first people to pass are now passing in a different kind of way. So I think there's one left of the people from 53.
That's right.
Who's
in his 90s.
Yeah, in his 90s. But this means it's changing and evolving. It's ceasing to be British. It's ceasing to be male-dominated. It's ceasing to be trade and becoming more in terms of production and selling and marketing and everything else like that.
I think more than half the students right now are women.
Yeah, much more than half, and we're very pleased with that. At the moment, the number of MWs is 2/3 male to 1/3 female, but it's changing with every passing year because you're better tasters and you live longer. So here we go. So the mission statement, maybe we'll read this out. The MW's mission is to promote excellence, interaction, and learning across all sectors of the global wine community. MW's prove their understanding of all aspects of wine by passing the exam, recognised globally for its rigour and exacting standards. So one of the questions I usually get asked at this kind of point is, what's the difference between an MW and a Master Sommelier? Which is a hard question to answer, and the MS exam is in many ways harder, but in many ways it's different. It's a verbal exam, and I would say the difference is that the MS qualification is vocational. It exists for sommeliers, for people who are serving wine as their living, whereas the MW qualification is more academic and more in-depth. So an MS would need to know, for example, all the Große Gewackers of Germany by name, and an MW needs to know why. Well, not all of them by name, but why they're there and who wants in and who wants out and what caused it, which is not a question that any customer in a restaurant is ever going to ask, but they might ask what this one tastes like. Does that make sense? That's the subtle difference. It's not knowing facts and figures as much as knowing the why and the explanation.
I think one is trade-orientated. So if you're a wine producer or a journalist or in the wine trade, you're much more likely to pursue the Master of Wine than you are the Master Sommelier. Master Sommelier has traditionally been for people who've been in wine service, as Rod said. I think in terms of the stamina of the exam, it's quite different too. Yeah. And I think the MW exam, in that respect, requires a lot more mental muscle because you have to do 4 days of exams, blind tasting, theory exams, and then you have a thesis at the end of it, a research project, whereas the MS, I think, is 1 day.
Yeah, one pretty tough day. You can actually take a look at the people who've passed both, and you can see the kind of discipline involved. Not very few, I think 5, of whom the most celebrated was the late Gérard Basset, who was very good at explaining the subtle differences, and he was in a position to do that because he had passed both and was the best sommelier in the world as part of his career.
He once looked after me and my mother and father, who were very elderly, and he managed to make 1 bottle of champagne go 12 ways perfectly. Kind of says it all, doesn't it?
Yeah. Okay, so that's the difference between it. A little bit of the history. You can trace. This makes it sound all sort of fuddy-duddy and British to go back to the 14th century, but the Vintners Company in London was one of the livery companies, and that was the origin of wine trade in the UK. And the UK was a logical place for this to start, in a way, because the UK always has been, and pretty much still is, a country that enjoys drinking wine without really producing wine. Most countries do one or the other. I know there is English wine and it's important and it's good, but it's statistically not so relevant. Whereas most of the other Northern European countries stuck with beer until really the last century. So it was logical that it started there.
At this time, England actually owned vast swathes of France. And the Vintners Company, that's the year of the foundation of the Vintners Company in its current form. And it was the Feast of the 5 Kings, 2 of whom were prisoners of Edward III, the King of France and the King of Scotland. And at that time, all Gascon wine, all wine of Bordeaux, had to come through the Vintners Company. It was a wonderful monopoly.
Didn't expect a history lesson too, huh? Excellent. And then we skip forward to 53, which is when the first Master of Wine exam was held. I think of 9 people sat it and 6 people got it. And then reading those dates forward, the Institute was formed in 55 from those people who passed. I knew I'd do this. I can't see that screen either. Yeah, the first female Master of Wine in 1970, who was in the trade, that was important. And Sarah Morphew-Stephen is still going. At our 60th anniversary, there was a big event in London. She gave the most fantastic, electrifying speech about talking about breaking down the male dominance of the UK wine trade. And then to 84, which was when the first person from outside the trade itself, who was a journalist, at the time journalists were looked down on by traders, without them realizing quite how important to the future of wine such people were, and that was Jancis Robinson, who I'm sure you've all heard of. And then finally in 88 they decided to stop it being just an exclusively British thing, and Michael Hill-Smith and his wines are Shaw and Smith. You may have come across those. They're very classic Adelaide Hills wines, and he owns Toll Puddle and a few others. Still a very active member of the community, especially in Australia. Yes, so the first Master of Wine in the USA, yes, so Tim Hannay and Joel Butler are still very much active in the Institute as well, and got quite well-known characters. And that launched the reach out into the States, which is obviously a very significant and important market. And a little bit like the UK, imports a lot of wine. It wasn't a country that sold only its own wine, so there was an important role for us there. Then Asia, which is now doing what the USA did then, I think, becoming one of the most important markets. Prior to you-know-what, I was doing a lot of work in China, 6 times a year, obviously not currently now, a little bit on Zoom. And someone told me there are now more wine drinkers in China than there are people in America. And that is quite a telling statistic, because most of the people in America don't drink wine. So it is the most important market, and the thirst for knowledge is extraordinary. It's almost outrunning the thirst for wine itself. So we now have lots based in Asia. There's going to be a photograph of our Chinese mainland resident MWs, and I think there's room for many more. Do you want to read this out?
No.
So I'll just carry on.
Go for it.
Okay. As of 2010, more than a third were based outside the UK, and that number is growing. And in 2015, we managed to get 24 people passing. As we'll come on to, and Dimitri said, it's a 3-stage exam. There's a practical exam tasting, a theory exam writing, and then a research project after you've done the other 2. So you do get these years when lots of people end up passing simultaneously. And yeah, 24 in 1 year was quite a cram for the ceremony, but it was good fun. So what is a Master of Wine? Technically, it's just a member of the Institute, so it's a membership-owned and run organisation. There's a board of directors, which is called the Council, which I'm on, and we function as an independent organisation. So in order to become a member of that organisation, you have to pass the exam, obviously, which is all about communicating wine. It's not about knowing stuff, it's about being able to communicate stuff. And that involves tasting, theory knowledge, and essay writing, being a member of the industry in some form, and then signing a code of conduct, which has got some fairly scary things about drunkenness in it. So we have to sort of, okay, I'll pretend to do that, that's for sure.
Code of misconduct.
Yeah. There are MWs in all these fields now. It started only really as traders and importers, and now we've got retailers, buyers, educators, a lot of people from the WCT. I remember when David Wrigley was the first WCT person to become an MW, and now I think there's 6 or 7.
Something like that.
Journalists, Tim Atkin, Jancis Robinson, several others, importers, winemakers. Very important we have some winemakers. The most significant, I think, of the winemakers is Olivier Humbrecht, who was French, and is French. And we have a real difficulty in France because, as you're probably aware, most French people think that the only wine that exists is French, and that's all it needs to know. I live in Nice, so I think I can say that. I think there's something about the fact that in France, the word for foreign wine is the same as the word for strange wine, vin étranger. So you get this little shelf in the corner, and it's Prosecco and Rioja, and that's about it. But it's very important we have winemakers. It was great that Olivier, who is a fantastic winemaker.
He's also a chemist, and he's a biodynamicist. So that's quite a triumvirate of skills and different objective views.
Yeah. I was on the MW trip to Georgia. We go on trips, there will be a slide, and I was on the trip to Georgia with him, and he peeled off for one day in search of the Qvevri makers to go and buy some. Join a queue, but he did that. And then the inevitable consultants, which I think both of us qualify as. So a few facts, 419 now, 3 just passed, so that statistic has been updated, based in 30 countries. Almost half, very nearly half. We just need a UK person to die for that to be half, based outside the UK. 376 people studying from 41 countries, so we're now broadening that geographical spread. And in 2021, 13 new passes. 2020, there were 23 passes, but they haven't yet had their ceremony for obvious reasons, so we're looking forward to a double-headed ceremony. There's going to be a lot of Bollinger drunk on those 2 days, within the code of conduct, obviously. Good stuff to come. It's a growing organisation. We want to get to... we have no fixed targets, but we really want to cross that 500 in the next few years. And we have a symposium every 4th year. And the last symposium was in Rioja in 2018. It was a fantastic event. And the next one was due to be 22 in Adelaide. It's now been pushed back to 23 for obvious reasons, and shortly to be announced where that's going to be, but easier to get to than Adelaide, I think I can let on. Maybe, if you're interested, that will be probably in June and 23. And not as far away as Australia. Okay. Well, that's a spread of the map. So that's MW. So it's fantastic. We've now got, it's probably got a point.
The important figures here, look at France and Italy. So the Anglo-Saxon countries are, other than England, other than Britain, so Canada, the US, Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa, are producing more and more MWs and more MW students. But I think France and Italy are the ones to watch.
Yeah, absolutely.
Those countries with a very strong wine production of their own, a very long wine or vinous history, who until recently rather eschewed or didn't consider the value of the MW, are now jumping in with both feet. Says Cyprus 1 is actually half. That's my upper half. That's me.
It's half of you. Okay, and this is perhaps better because it's the students by country of residence. So you can see that far more in the States than in the UK. Well, not far more, but more outside the UK, in America there. But also we've got, looking at that, fantastic, 3 in Turkey and how many in Italy? 9 in Italy, I think, yeah. So a much bigger spread. And a few countries there that didn't appear on the previous slide. Oman, it can't be easy to study wine in Oman, I wouldn't have thought, with availability and so on.
And the expense. Can you imagine how much a bottle of wine costs?
He's got quite a good job, but even so.
£100 for a bottle of Pinot Grigio.
Bargain. Okay, so I think that's enough of that, isn't it? Because we want to get to do some tasting. So this is the procedure. We do vet the applications. We have far more applications than we can possibly take on. The application procedure involves writing some tasting notes, writing an essay, being proposed by somebody, and having your own sort of statement. And those are then marked. We don't look at this point for people who know how it functions. We just look for sheer, raw, likely to succeed in it. It's as much displaying drive and commitment as it is displaying, knowledge of esoteric wine things. That then gets you onto stage 1, which involves a residential seminar. It's a self-study program. No one sits down and teaches you about wine. You learn for it yourself, but you learn best with other people, which has made it exceptionally hard this last 18 months for the people who sat the exam this year, who've been pretty much on their own for a year.
I think that's an important point, because your fellow students will be captains of what they do. They could be eminent winemakers, they could be chemists, they could be famous enologists, they could be buyers of a supermarket, they could be almost anyone who can help you in the whole endeavor. So you pool your resources, you pool your knowledge. When I was an MW student, I worked for a fine wine business, Berry Brothers and Rudd. I knew nothing about supermarket wine. Luckily, there were supermarket buyers and technologists on the same course.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very important. So the poor people, I know Coravan has probably helped make a bottle go further, but what really helps make a bottle go further is having a room full of people. And unfortunately, that hasn't been an option for the last 18 months. So real kudos to all the people who've sat the exam and the stage 1 assessment this year. It was cancelled last year because it had to be in person and it couldn't happen. So this year it has happened just recently. Then when you pass the exam, which Christina's about to, you get to do a research paper, which has to be an original piece of study, but it can be any subject of your choice connected to wine. And there have been some really bleak connections to wine, in fact, wine, music and poetry and so on, or the science, or the consumer reaction, whatever you want, and they will guide you in that. I did mine about Chenin Blanc in Anjou-Saumur. Yeah, it was great fun. Okay, and then you get in, which is great. Entry to the program, you need to have a wine qualification. We need some. It's not WSET level 5. That's not what it is. You don't need the WSET diploma, but you need something similar. And there are similar level qualifications in enology and the commerce of wine. An MBA would do. Lots of things are more than enough. But you need to show some level of commitment to wine learning, and the diploma is the easiest of those. And it's a good background level of knowledge to have. You need to have been involved in the wine industry for 3 years. It's not a qualification for sort of enthusiastic hobbyists as a second.
3 years doesn't sound much at all, but when you consider that many people in the wine industry have already had a career doing something else, it kind of makes sense. I started off as a headhunter. I used to recruit people until I realized I hated it. And then I went into the wine business 20-something years ago. So I think only 3 years. It's quite rare to find someone who's only had 3 years' experience.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, I think we've done that, haven't we? Okay, well, obviously you've missed it for this year. Sorry, this one slide hasn't been updated. So we can add a year onto that. And we will get back to normal. In fact, the application procedure this year was delayed slightly for obvious reasons. So everything, touch wood, everything goes back to normal next year. The exam will be in June, and the application procedure will be running as it normally does. So opens in May and closes in June 22. And I hope some of you will, if you've got the diploma and you're feeling enthused, may think about it. You then go to do a residential seminar, and you can choose. I guess some of the guys coming to the next one won't have quite so much of a choice, but we have one in Austria, one in Australasia, and 2 in North America, in fact. TAMS stands for Theory...
I can't remember.
Theory Assisted Marking Scheme. And
your essays are judged.
Practical Assisted Marking Scheme. So it is a self-learning thing. You don't get taught, but you do get feedback on what you do. So this is when you send in essays or you send in tasting notes, and someone marks them and tells you how to shape them to the MW way. We do course days, which have been online this last year. It has worked, I think, as well as it could. But as I'm sure all of you know, or some of you know, the rebottling in little bottles is not foolproof, and you're dependent on postal and courier services, and you can't do sparkling and all of that kind of thing. So it hasn't been perfect, but we've done the best we could. You get a MW mentor who will help. Someone who knows what's involved and will help advise you on that.
And you have a say in your mentor. If you know someone, I was friends with Christina before she became an MW student, so she said, could I be your mentee? I said, yes. But you're usually assigned a mentor, and then you see how it works. And if it doesn't work, you ask, could I perhaps have someone else?
Yep. There are organised trips and visits which have been online this year, but we'll hopefully go back to being in person in the new year. And then you sit an assessment, which this year was done online in August, in fact, but it's normally in person in June. the same week as the actual exam, and it takes the form of a 12-wine tasting, any mixture of wine, and an afternoon of writing essays. You're not expected to be at the MWW level there, but you are expected to show the potential. You can repeat that once, or you may be asked to repeat it, and then once you've passed that, you progress to stage 2, which is the... Oh, sorry, here's an example of the practical question you might get. So they certainly wouldn't have got it this year because they were sparkling wines and it was done with little rebottling.
Little tiny bottles sent from London.
So you always get something given. It's not 12... The exam takes the form of 36 wines and the stage 1 assessment takes the form of 12 wines, but it's not simply, what are these wines? There are always something given. So it says they're from different countries, which doesn't sound like that much of a clue, but actually if you know what one of them is, you can begin to place the other more accurately. So in the case of this pairing, well, it's a Prosecco, so I'm sure you'd all spot that. You'd probably spot the producer. But a Prosecco paired against a Champagne means you only really need to know for sure what one of those is to be able to place the other as not Franciacorta or whatever. And then there will be questions to answer. And the questions are not always the same. And in fact, every year they will slightly change the questions to make people think, so that you can't have pre-prepared, this is my answer for Chablis, and I'm going to trot that out. It will be a question about something.
The interesting thing here is the origin is not that important. So at diploma level, the origin's very important. But the whole point of this is to make you think in terms of how was the wine made? What were the climatic influences? What is the style of the wine and how was it achieved through its method of production or winemaking? How good is it? Where does it sit in the pantheon of quality? And what's it made from?
I think actually when we come to this shortly, we've got 3 wines coming, and I think they would very much ask questions like that. It would be a flight, there will be a given thing, and we'll give you that thing, and here it would be identify the origin as closely as possible, but the quality would be more important, and how it was made would be more important still. Always adds up to 25 marks per wine. And there is sometimes a group question, so these 3 wines are all the same grape variety. What is the grape variety, referencing all 3? So they'd carve it up differently, but I think with the 3 wines that are coming, very much that would be the theme. And the weighting, probably. So these are some example theory questions. These could be the same for the actual exam as well. They're all available. It's public. Unlike the MS exam, which is very secretive, you can go onto the MW website and you can look at all of the current papers. And I think the general public can look at the past papers as well. Certainly the students can. And they're published as a press release. And Jancis Robinson actually republishes them in the Financial Times. So it's all widely available. There's nothing secret about it.
But that's on your side as well. Knowing the previous year's questions and the previous 5, 10 years helps you prepare, because it gives you sight of the kind of questions that will be asked against the various learning outcomes of the program itself.
Oh, I hope that's not us telling us to shut up.
Should we stop now?
Probably is. So I'm not going to read those out, but you can see there that we've got some technical stuff, some boring stuff, but lots of the wine industry is based around quality control and shipping and chemistry and taxes and duties and currency exchanges and all that kind of stuff. It's just as important as the romantic stuff of grapes in the vineyard, which is the thing perhaps we're all interested in. But you talk to a quality control person, they're fantastically interested in their bottling line. In fact, you visit any winery, they'll show you off their bottling line because it's cost so much money. So it covers everything, every aspect of it. There we go. And then you pass on to stage 2, another seminar in a different place. And you get to choose, subject to transport restrictions, obviously. You get yet more of these theory marking schemes. Then this RAMS is your research paper marking scheme, so you can begin to prepare your research paper, get approval for your chosen subject in advance of knowing that you're going to pass, or having that self-confidence anyway. Your mentor carries on. You may get a different mentor. You can change, more trips and visits. It can take some time to get this. Very few people pass the first time. Very few. But some people do, and it's possible, but it's not a race. I don't think people ask you, how long did it take you? I hope not. I didn't pass first time. Did you pass first time?
Yes, I did. Not.
Yeah, so 1 year minimum, and then 6 years. There is a maximum. It's not It's because we want to get this pass rate up. We don't want people who aren't going to pass to keep on taking it. It's unfair to take their money. If after 6 attempts you haven't got it, it's probably likely that
your chances improve once you've passed something as well. Once you pass the theory or pass the practical, you have more time in your life and you feel calmer and better about yourself. So the chances, once you've passed something, your chances of passing the rest of it are greatly enhanced.
Yeah. More people pass the theory than the practical. That's the hardest part in terms of the pass rate. So he then takes the form of the exam. The practical is 3 papers, traditionally 12 whites, 12 reds, and 12 anything else. But that's just a convention. They have put sparkling wine in paper 1. They have put sweet wine. Obviously, if they're going to examine Riesling then, or Muscat, then they do have to put a sweet wine.
You might get 6 roses. You might get 7 or 8 Rieslings.
Yeah, yeah. So in paper 3 can be sparkling, sweet, fortified, anything, or just more red and white, or it could be anything. 1 year, paper 3 was 9 vintages of Cos d'Estournel, which is not going to happen again on a financial basis, I'm guessing, but it could do, I suppose. And then theory is 5 written papers, which you take in the afternoons. There we go, yeah, so... The 5 written papers are viticulture, so from the vineyard to harvest, although it can run over and be overlapped, but it's made clear, and then from harvest to maturation, and then the quality control aspect of bottling and shipping and so on. Then the business of wine, so not just marketing, but actually the hard end of selling and also promotion and that kind of thing. And then finally a 5th paper, which makes you think. So it's not necessarily questions to which there's an answer. It's questions where they want to understand your thought process. So sometimes some very weird questions just to make you think.
They could be about wine and health.
Yeah, it's often about wine and health, but it could, contemporary.
Could be anything.
Issues. So I would have thought this year was there something about smoke taint? You'd like to? Oh. No, everyone had revised it. Okay, yeah, there we go. So it will always be based, and they set the exam in sort of Christmas, so yeah.
In years gone by,
one question this year was, is there objectively, one better wine than another? Discuss.
Yes, that's very typical.
I didn't choose that.
Yeah.
Yeah, some of the superficially simple ones are very, it's a trip up. But often they'll say, you could argue this both ways. It wasn't which way you argued it, it was how you argued it that they were trying to assess. I should say at this point, the tasting exam has to be written in English, but they do not mark your English. The theory exam you can write in your own language, and they get it translated. So we do not want this to be regarded as an Anglophone qualification only. I do, however, have a very good friend of mine, Marina Guyan from Argentina. She started off the course at the same time as I did and said, do you know what, I'm going to take a pause for a couple of years and get my English better because all the books I want to read are in English and not in Spanish, and I need to do that. So I think in some ways you do need to speak some English to be able to take the course, to be able to study the world's wines. That's just how it is. And so for that reason, we are happy that the tasting exam remains in English, but it's not marked on grammar or spelling or anything like that.
I had the experience, I was told my notes were beautiful when I was writing them, but I never finished. And yet I looked at my Spanish friends and German friends, whose English wasn't as good as mine, who wrote less. They were much more conserving of their language, and they managed to finish more quickly. Finish the exam, which put them in better stead to pass.
Exactly. Yep. Well, there you go. So it's not an English exam. And then once you've passed those parts, this is part of the exam. So it's not some kind of add-on, and it's not automatic either. But most people do end up getting this, but it can take another year, 2 years, 3 years. Most people do it quickly because they've already been thinking about it throughout the course. And it's not PhD level, but it is kind of modelled on that original research where you address a topic and answer it on a subject of your choice.
It's not supported. That's why it's very different from a PhD as well. PhD is usually about 40,000 words, and you have a supervisor. This is unsupervised, but you have a mentor, don't you?
You do have an advisor, yeah.
An advisor who will look at your work and advise you.
And then you pass, and then they drown you in Bollinger, which is great fun.
Yes.
Some recent research paper topic. Again, these are not always published because they may involve commercially sensitive stuff, but you can ask the Institute for access to them, and some of them are published because there's nothing secret about them. So we can see here impact of selected finding agent on the phenolic content and aromatic intensity of Muscat à petit grain. I'll read that one day. But then, depictions of grapes, vines, and wine in the work of 4 17th century English poets. You can do what you like. There's been a couple on music, actually, music and wine, which I think is really interesting. And then do amateur reviews have a more significant impact on sales of wine than expert reviews, which is clear, as we can see, as we're moving from Parker to Vivino, and we can see that progression. So that would be an interesting paper to read, and also a work in progress that will be changing the answer to that question.
I think it's fair to say that the research projects now are much more all-encompassing in their subject area as well. They include the arts, they include real life, they aren't just technically based, which they used to be. When I did mine, I thought it was completely ruined by having to run various points of research, which made it so dry and unreadable. Which it was anyway.
There are some interesting subjects, there we go. The quantification of variability of mesoclimates among important vineyard regions in Israel. Well, that was a guy called Aaron Pick, you won't mind me saying so, fantastic winemaker making some great wine. But of course, the only person who could mark that was probably him. So they will have had to struggle to find a marker for that, I would think, and that's what they do. It's all done by a panel. But so you can see the others there. Climate change, that's always a good subject in some respects because it's so hot topic and other people are researching it for you and everyone's interested in the answer, really. Okay, so this is the 2020 vintage of MWs, and we can see Gabriele there amongst some, not all of the others. So great finally to have an Italian on the board. Italian, sorry? Yes, absolutely, absolutely, for Gabriele. Do you all know Gabriele, I guess? Is he sort of famous in Italy? I'd hope so. And this is 3 famous, they're not actually American because Mary's Irish, but they all live in America. And Amy on the right there is a great winemaker in Santa Barbara. Some lovely, lovely wines she's making. So that's just a picture of people having fun. These are our 5 Chinese mainland resident. And actually, Edward, who's the one that doesn't look at the back, who doesn't look Chinese, is married to Feng Yi, just in front of him with the blue hair. Gus, who's actually Chinese born, bred, and resident. And to his left, on the right of the picture, is Julien, who's actually French. He's from Alsace, but he's lived in Nanning for a long time. A most astonishing speaker of Mandarin. I was with him in Shanghai once, and Chinese person came up to me and he answered in this, and this Chinese guy was visibly could not believe how absolutely pitch perfect Julian's Mandarin is.
Who's the lady at the front?
I can't remember. She's one of the new ones. It's not Lynn. Lots of Chinese who don't live in China are passing, but those are the 5 residents anyway. And you can see all having fun. That's a trip that I wasn't on. I hope it wasn't because I wasn't invited.
That's Italy.
And you're not on either.
That's Alto Adige.
I guess so, yeah. Yeah, it is. You can see the Dolomiti there. This is Ken. It's nice that there's a photograph of Ken, the one holding the camera. He's Japanese, and really his English was incredibly poor at the time he took the exam. Really, that was the most remarkable thing about it, in the fact really was that he passed the tasting exam with very poor English. But it's about how good you are as a taster, not how good you are at English. Everything else he did was translated. And he's, in true Japanese fashion, his English is now pretty good, well, a lot better than it was anyway. But he's a great guy. And he was, I think, our first Japanese resident.
Yes, he was.
And that's Stephen Skelton there just behind him. And that's actually in our offices in London, which is a tasting room and a function room. And one day you better go there. I'm over time, aren't I? Yeah. There's some more of us, not me. I don't know where that is. Caro Moore there in the middle, you might better see. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. I was in that one, though, very, very small, and that was a 20th anniversary trip to Bordeaux and lunch at Aubryon, which is something you want when Monsieur Delmar produces the 90 and the 89, I think, and several of the whites, A pretty good thing. So that kind of thing happens. Does open a few doors. This is how much it costs. So we'll skip mid on that. It's not cheap, but it doesn't make profit. It's not for making profit. It's a charitable organisation from that point of view. So it costs to get it what it costs to run it. But we do have various companies who sponsor, who make that cost less. And we have a very proactive executive director now who is getting more companies interested in this, even despite the last 18 months. So hopefully the cost to students will go down a little bit when we get more sponsorship and support from people like this. And these are the 5 principal supporters. Axel Miller-Siemens, as you know, owns several chateaux in Bordeaux and in Portugal and Tokai and so on. Waitrose is a British supermarket, quite high-end. The Austrian wine organisation, their main support is running one of these seminars, or helping fund that, but fantastically supportive. Constellation, huge company, very important, doesn't favour their brands, but really they're a big part of how we function in North America. And then our longest-standing sponsor is the Madame Bollinger Foundation, and they give us a lot of wine, even in years with a Bond movie, which is great. Anyway, there we go. I used to work for Bollinger, and I knew, the amount of wine we could supply to anyone else went down quite a lot in a year of a Bond film. And then these are other supporters, and hopefully some of these will move on to that previous slide going forward. Trentodoc sponsor a really wonderful trip every year, and this year it couldn't happen, so they've sent out some zero dosage tasting for us, which is really, really fantastic. So yeah, so we'll leave those there. And that's contact details. We're on everything. Yeah, there you go. So, time to taste, I think. So you have 3 wines. I think we go back to that slide, shall we, as an indication of what might happen.
We'll use that one slide for all 3 wines, just to give an indication of some semblance of reality. You just passed it.
So, what I think that they would say in this question is wines 1, 2, and 3 are from the same country. And there would be, they might just leave that question exactly as it is, because identify the origin as closely as possible means you've got to pick 3 places in the same country. They might have a group question saying, what is the country, and justify it. It doesn't really matter. Those are the fundamental questions they ask. They only really ever ask about method of production, grape variety, origin, quality, maturity. Those are the key subject areas. And if something isn't mentioned, the grape variety is not asked for specifically here, but in quite a lot of the world's places, the grape variety is implicit in its origin, which I think you'll find is the case with at least some of these wines.
Or it could be predominant grape variety, the main grape variety, because it might be a blend.
Yeah. So let's, how long have we got actually? How dramatically over time are we, Christina?
Fine.
That's okay. So take 5 minutes to taste these 3 wines and think, how would you address this? So the most marks for how it was made, then for the quality, and then finally for basically what it is, the origin.
And as a clue, method of production starts out in the vineyard, starts at the pre-fermentation manipulation. I'm not even sure you'll want to spit them out. Spit them in.
The code of conduct says spit, obviously, but it's got an 8 o'clock at night, and I suspect they're pretty good ones, so feel free to not spit. I'm not telling you. I just want to know whose it is.
Different vintage. Actually, see the vintage. Yeah, yeah.
More minutes. We start. Right. So when you're tasting in the MW fashion, you don't. Your first thought process shouldn't be what are they. Your first thought process should be what's the structure of the wine? How much alcohol? How much acid? Is there any sugar? Has there been oak? Has it come from a hot place? Has it come from a cool place? Does it have a European influence? That kind of thing. And those then inform your conclusion about what it is. And then when it comes to quality, you need to start thinking, is it balanced? One of these wines, fairly obvious what it is, I think. And it's got a lot of alcohol. And when you have a wine with a lot of alcohol, you need to know, is that balanced with the level of fruit? Is it balanced with the acidity? Is it displaying the right level, which it is, I think. So those are the things you need to, about every wine. Sometimes you get wines, and hopefully with at least one of these that was there for you, that then opens the country. Sometimes you do know what they are, but that's good and bad. It's good because, of course, you know what it is, but it's bad because you start thinking, well, it's that, it must be good. If it's that, it must be made like this. And that's not always the case. Sometimes you can get, I remember we put in a very cheap Veneto Merlot once, which had actually been Ripasso, and it was a really, really good wine. But because people got it as Veneto Merlot, they thought, well, it must be cheap, because Veneto Merlot is cheap. And it wasn't cheap, and it wasn't like that. So you need to be analytical and not allow yourself to get trapped in your own thought process. But at the same time, when you do know what it is, you need to have the courage to say, I know what it is and why.
I would say objectivity is vital as well. I judge with him once a year, and I think we're good at being objective because having been 20 years selling wine, if I only sold the wine I liked, that I thought was good because I liked it, I wouldn't have sold much wine, because what I like is a relatively narrow band of wine. So wine can be very high in quality, but you may not personally like it.
Torrentes. Yeah. So these are from the same country. Not a difficult guess, I don't think. European country or a New World country? A warm country or a cool country? Can't really say, in a way, but warmer. So warmer than France, anyway. So it is, of course, the country we're in, fairly obviously. Some of you probably guessed that as they were being poured out. But again, you need to be objective. So we have 3 Italian wines. Then it's a question of answering the method of production thing, I think, in your head, but making sure it's consistent with what you think it is. So we've got some very distinctive methods of production going on here, especially with the third wine, where if you don't describe it right, you're not going to get the marks because it's made in a particular way. And so you then have to attribute those qualities in the wine to something that's going on in the vineyard and then in the winery, but with something from the glass at all points. You don't suddenly say, well, I think it's this, therefore it's made like that. It was made like this, and therefore it's that, is the right process to go through. So in some ways, they're in the right order, I think, which is not always the case, is it, Christina? Sometimes they'll put the alcoholic one first. They are in the right order to taste. And the first one is the lightest of them in alcohol, in everything, probably even in colour if you had a full glass. Comment on the method of production, considering how it's influenced the style of the wine, I think would involve something about the soil here, the terroir, because I think it's giving something of that. It's giving some of its mineral quality. Is it not? Is that fair?
Non-fruited. There's lots of non-fruit flavour in the first wine.
So it's fresh and elegant and yet warm. I don't know what the alcohol is. I'm guessing it's not so high in the alcohol, but it's quite light. You know, in isolation, you might think, well, that's a bit Pinot Nero-y, but actually, it's richer than that, isn't it? Is that a fair comment?
More tannic.
Yeah, more tannic, more structured. And
but there's no influence. There's no influence of new wood.
No. So, what did you think the first one might be? Say again. Less, I mean, there's a bit of sugar on the third one, I think, which is normal, but yeah, they're all dry wines, aren't they? Yeah. Yeah, or origin. Well, often, these two varieties are often mistaken for each other, and that's why it's quite useful when you get a flight like this. There isn't in this case, but had there been a Nebbiolo, you would have been able to spot the difference. Because I think Nebbiolo would have more
tannin, more acidity.
And possibly even more acidity.
More extract.
The acid's right, the colour's right, and the fruit to earth profile is right, but actually the tannin's a bit wrong, isn't it? It's too featherweight in tannin to be Nebbiolo. And if you got a Nebbiolo here, it would be easy to spot the difference, which is why it's not sort of, here are 12 wines, tell us what they are. There's always an element of work it out. But you are under time pressure when you do it, like we are.
The hardest questions on the paper I found, and I think students still find, are what are known as the mixed bag. You might have 3 to 6 wines that have no relationship with each other, and then you really are lost, or you can be. So you have to take each wine on its own merits. With these, though, you can work out the country because of the overall restraint, because of the climatic conditions that have produced these wines, because of the cultural effects of the country in question, Italy.
So on that first one for me, the way to tell that it's not so tannic is really tannic wines make you lick your teeth. You instinctively run your tongue over your teeth after you've had a really tannic wine. You maybe do that with the middle one, but you don't on the first one. It's got tannin, it's a dry wine, it's a wine in isolation, there's no food, but it isn't tannic enough to be Nebbiolo. Well, I mean, obviously there are some Nebbiolos that are lighter in tannin, but it is mistaken for that often. I often think this grape tastes like the alliance, not that it's ever happened, of Pinot Noir and Nebbiolo.
I agree with that.
What might that be describing? Okay.
Go on. Be brave. Get it wrong. It doesn't matter. Of course they know.
Okay, no one's shouting out. So I think the producer's in the room. Is that right? Yeah. Yes. So it's a Nerello from Etna, I guess.
Is it just Nerello Mascalese, or is there Cappuccio as well? It's delicious.
It is delicious, isn't it? And it you know, if you grew Pinot Noir somewhere this hot, you wouldn't get elegance and delicacy like this. You know, you can get. It is possible to get good Pinot Noir in hot places, Russian River and so on, but you get kind of big extract of everything. You don't get this lightweight feather like tannins and fresh acidity with it. So if you like Pinot Noir, yeah.
I always think when it is blind and I actually see the things that you said. So the structure that is similar is in between Pinot Noir and Nebbiolo. I always get in my mind, it's like having a love affair between Pinot Noir and Nebbiolo. And when it comes into my mind and I taste it again, I say, okay, this is Nerello, and I go for it. So it's also a mental process when you have something that it fixes for you, it works for you, no?
It's so much that. And that's why it's all about experience. That's why people need to have diploma and 3 years in the trade, because it is all about these things. Caro Mora, who's a very famous German MW, she said, well, obviously I can always spot Riesling because I'm German, I wouldn't be allowed not to. So, but if it's a Riesling and I don't like it, it's Alsace. And that's the way she judges it. You could split apart German.
It's like me with Pinotage.
Oh, well, no one likes that. Okay, so let's move. So it's delicious wine. So thank you very much. Yes, it is exactly what you want Nerello Mascalese to be. It's got the mineral quality. It's 13% alcohol. I just saw it. It really is very well balanced, which is where the quality comes in. It's all about balance. It's not about intensity and depth. There is complexity of flavour, but it's about balance for me. So obviously we know it's in Italy. This wine somehow tastes warmer, doesn't it? And I think that's probably driven from altitude and the variety, because it isn't actually technically a warmer place. But you're not going to get much warmer than Sicily.
And it is a grape, in wine number 2, that can be confused with Nerello. Just depends on the origin. Here, it tastes warming. It tastes like somewhere that might have the effects of latitude against it.
Yeah. Well,
and not so much altitude.
And yeah, wind cooled as well. Well, I told you there's no Nebbiolo here. So this grape is often confused with Nebbiolo again, but for different reasons. For me, it's warmer and more, the tannins are rounder than Nebbiolo's stark tannins. The acidity's there. But for me, this is always a combination of red fruit and savoury herbs, always. I get sage and thyme.
It reminds me of black tea.
That kind of
I
thing.
don't know what it is.
So what grape variety is this? Everyone must know this, I would hope. This is your sort of pan-Italian grape variety.
But in its homeland, it comes in 2 or more distinct styles.
Yeah. So this is, well, does anyone know? Because within its grape variety, there are many choices. No one wants to. Okay, it's Sangiovese, yeah? And it's from, well, is it Chianti or is it Montalcino? And it's very difficult to tell the difference. I often think there's an overlap here. The very highest quality Chiantis can very much replicate Brunellos. But actually, it is a Brunello. So it's pure Sangiovese. I know that Gran Selezione Chianti has to be pure Sangiovese now, but most Chianti, apart from that, will have something else in it. I think at the MW exam level, you would not be massively penalised for confusing Brunello di Montalcino and top Chianti. You'd be penalised for getting the quality wrong, but you wouldn't be penalised for the origin, because we all know that. It's like in Burgundy. One village can differ from another village by less than one producer can differ from another producer in terms of use of stems, and with vintage variations added into the bargain. So it's not a guessing game. It's about justifying the quality, and that's why there'd be more marks for that, and there are more marks for that. But it has a kind of, it doesn't have that sort of slightly tomatoey quality that Chianti sometimes has. If you had to pick, I think you'd be able to make a justification for your choice.
I think it tastes varietal too. I know some Chiantis are, and some of the more senior Chiantis are full-bodied like this, but it just tastes warming. It tastes like it's from a slightly warmer climate than Chianti, which of course it is.
And a lot of Chianti at this level has now seen new oak, and this hasn't. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's not Brunello either, but yeah, that can be a bit of a clue. A lot of Gran Selezione Chianti and Chianti Classico Reserva will have seen some new oak in its journey, and this hasn't. It's older oak, isn't it? It's a very lively wine. I don't know if the producer for this one's here, but do you like it?
It's lovely.
Yeah, it's very lovely, isn't it? Très difficile à cracher.
This is, I haven't got my glasses on. This is the 16 by Fanti. Maybe number 3 is the most obvious.
Yeah, I think number 3 probably is the most obvious. It would open up the country for you. Number 1, you could say, well, I'm not 100% sure on that. It's definitely European. It tastes like the Pinot family, whatever. I don't think any of these wines taste Spanish, and I don't think they taste French either. But this one really can only be what it is. And you don't need to be the winemaker to kind of know that, because it's made in a different way, isn't it? And I think you can feel this is not really made from grapes. It's made from dried grapes. And I think you can feel that. You can feel the alcohol, you can feel the flavor, you can feel the texture.
It's the shape of the tannins as well.
Yeah.
The tannins feel different. There's a very slight sort of hydrolyzed feeling to them. And it tastes juicy, fleshy, and has a sense of desiccated grapes, dry grapes, raisins.
And so that makes... I know there are other places in Friuli and all over the place making wine with dried grapes, but actually, of course... And they do tend to stick to classic examples. I think it would be off the wall for them to put a Passamento red wine like this from somewhere other than Valpolicella in the exam, although we never say never. So it is an Amarone. There is a hint of sugar left, as there often is with Amarone. I think the maximum is it 9 or 6? There's the maximum grams per litre of sugar that's allowed to be in Amarone. And there's a little bit here. It's not 100% bone dry, which is a clue to its origin, but it's well balanced with the freshness of the acidity. Again, the secret for good Amarone for me is cleanliness. You get cheap Amarone. I mean, never buy cheap Amarone. This really shouldn't be a thing, because there will always be a little bit of rot, and there'll always be some Corvinone, which is that green, slightly underripe clone. And if you mix it together, you tend to get problems. So it's all about getting extreme cleanliness along with the dried fruit quality of making a wine from raisins.
I think you have to look for the alcohol here too. It's so well integrated. This is close to 16% alcohol. Is it 16 or is it just under? 16.5?
Yeah.
There you go, it's more. You wouldn't guess, would you?
It will always be labelled as 16, though, won't it? Because then it pays a bit less tax, I'm sure. So I mean, Dal Forno and Quintarelli sometimes label at 17, but everyone else labels at 16. But it's all about balance. And I guess you didn't need to stop the fermentation, but you possibly would have stopped the fermentation with 3 grams of sugar and 16.5 alcohol, because you taste it every day and you think it's right now.
What is the residual sugar on this?
3? Yeah.
It's more, isn't it?
No, it's dry. It's dry. You can notice the sugar compared to the other two. The other two are bone dry. I mean, yeast never ferments to 0, but the other two are dry wines. You can just taste that hint, and it helps. Raisin flavours without a hint of sugar don't work, do they?
I think despite the alcohol, it's a very restrained style as well.
Amarone has really changed. When I first came into wine, Amarone was always 17% alcohol and just too much of everything. And too much of everything doesn't equal balance. Balance is about not having too much of anything, especially when you've got fruit that's delivering a lot of the ingredients. I think there's lots of parallels between wine and cooking here. You know, famously, they say that the very best Italian cooking is only 3 ingredients, but it's all about balance. More of everything doesn't make better wine. I think the Australians and the Californians discovered that the hard way. Just more new French oak, more extraction, more time on the vine, more everything. And then they just got this soupy stuff that maybe Robert Parker liked, but actually is very difficult to drink.
I think the quality question with these particular wines would probably be the easiest. It isn't always, and usually would have more marks. But these 3 wines are all of a very high quality. And you have to talk about classic regions in the context of the region. You just can't say a premium quality wine. You often have to talk about how much they cost. You often have to talk about the actual DOC or DOCG, or you have to talk about the cru. So in this case, I think you can easily recognize the quality of these 3 wines. What would normally happen, I think you would have something that was a lesser quality to the other 2.
Yes. I think we've taken enough of your time.
It's time for dinner.
But I hope that was mildly interesting, and at least it finished with 3 very, very good wines. So no spitting required from now on, that's for sure. So vi ringrazio molto, and enjoy the rest of the week in wonderful Milano.
Grazie Rod, grazie Dimitri, thank you all.
Pleasure.
It has been a really, really interesting masterclass. So Milano Wine Week is proud to have you today. I am honored to have you today, and this masterclass really get into the program of the Institute, and I hope that many people here and many people connected in digital Wine Week will have the opportunity to join the Institute the next year. And thank you again for your time and for your beautiful explanation of the program. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.